Hey, Steven, here we go again. Episode number 4 of Chinwag Nation, Surviving the Egomaniac. I don't know, when I read that, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, that's just kind of an intense word. It's kind of got a visceral feeling to it. When you read it, it's like it's intense. And maybe that's by design, like if you look at the definition, it's kind of maybe that's why that word was created in that way. But I also think it's something actually like I'm really excited to talk about and have you kind of lead us through this conversation today because I think people are impacted by it, right? I think we've seen it, we've experienced it, maybe we've even fallen into this persona at times, but
Yeah,
I think at the root of it, it speaks to something that you and I talk about often in our one-to-one conversations when we were working together, and that's just power dynamics in the workplace and how those play out and how those influence social dynamics, right? That's the part I geek out about. It's like the power dynamic and the social dynamic. And just I haven't covered the housekeeping piece, just so folks know. This is really this is Stephen and I's opinions. We're having a good chinwag for those folks, our English friends. We're not trying to steal that. I just thought it was a great way to explain what the intent of these types of conversations are. They're meant to be just a good informal like conversation around the things that we engage in as leaders and leaders in workspaces. But it is our opinion. It has no reflection of our past, current, or future organizations. It's really just us talking about the things that we think matter to folks, especially as it relates to leadership and leadership community. So, Stephen, I'm totally stoked about this conversation, and just excited for you to kind of take us through it today.
I appreciate that, Brian. And just to do a little bit of further housekeeping, I think we've got some general interest on this episode. So this may be one of the first episodes where we actually have a decent sized group paying attention. And so I was wondering, would you be willing to do your quick elevator speech as to what
Oh, sure,
third
yeah, yeah.
is?
What we're about, what third place leadership is about.
Yeah,
We understand that leadership spaces need community. You need a safe space to kind of sit in and talk about the hard stuff. I firmly believe, and this is something that I'm passionate about, and I know you believe this too, Stephen, and that's we're not meant to do this stuff alone. However, I think when we step into leadership roles, whether we're leading teams like as a manager or a supervisor or leading our project or initiative, we just inherently put ourselves on an island. We think in order to prove ourselves, we have to do it on our own. And I think it's actually the opposite. I think the most successful folks actually do it as a community and do it together. And we're not supposed to have it all answered. I don't know how many times I put my foot in my mouth to this day, right, as a leader. And I think that's part of leadership as well. And that's extreme ownership and humility. But what comes with that, right, is safety. And so if folks don't want to ask a question, during this conversation, they can absolutely reach out to us on the side as well.
awesome. And that's a great segue into this conversation, Brian, because I remember you and I were talking about before we had this episode, like, do we want to dive into this? It's only episode 4. This could be a little spicy, could be some of the hard stuff, and we decided that the whole purpose of third place leadership is to do the hard stuff together and talk about these challenging things. And something that was brought to us was, how do you survive, and not just survive but thrive um, in a culture or a team that has egos sort of at the center of their leadership style. And we've heard time and time again, right, that people don't leave their jobs; they leave their management, they leave their bosses. And so we wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about our experiences between Brian and myself. I think we've got close to 30 years of leadership experience between the two of us, but we wanted to talk about sort of egocentric leadership, the impacts of that. And actually, Brian, I was thinking I would start us off with just some definitions.
Sure. Yeah, and I just a quick aside there as well. We're all subject to ego,
Oh, totally.
right? I mean, I know there's been times where like there's a situation that puts you into an egotistical space, right? It's about, to your point, it's about survival,
Yeah.
right? And there are certain, I think, things that can trigger that, whether it's the past, right, which I think we've alluded to in kind of the tee up for this conversation. So, but yeah, go for it, man. Go for the definitions. I love it.
Yeah, I started with 6 definitions because I'm trying to remind myself that, you and I dialogue about this all the time, but not everybody is always in this same space. And we also have people that are interested in becoming leaders
Sure.
and leaders within their community or their family, but in the professional workplace. And so, first, I just want to define ego, right?
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
really,
Break it down.
which is your internal identity or self image. And in the workplace, this can manifest as a desire for control, status, or validation.
Mm,
And we took some notes as to like common drivers of ego and leadership. And these are things that I think, to your point, Brian, right? We've all experienced this, right? Fear of failure, desire for recognition, need for control, insecurity, self image. I think in some ways, right, these are all sort of variables in which we struggle with every day, and trying to figure out how much of this is ego driven or driven by something else, right? And having that self awareness. I also wanted to talk about emotional labor, which is the process of managing your emotions to meet organizational expectations, because I think that's a
mm,
term we're going to throw around today. Psychological safety is a term that we'll probably use today.
sure.
That's the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. Um, Servant leadership is a style of leadership we haven't talked about, but I think we'll talk about today. And that's a leadership philosophy focused around serving others. It emphasizes empathy, active listening, stewardship, and commitment to growth. There's the concept of managing up. So, proactively working with your supervisor or leadership in a way that builds trust, aligns expectations, and helps you navigate power dynamics constructively. And then the last one is power dynamics, which is the way power is distributed and used in relationships. In the workplace, this includes like formal roles or informal influence. So I just want to throw that out there just to kind of set the table as we dive in. I don't know if you
No,
get.
I think that's important, right? I think, and this is just a general philosophy, I think, for all leaders, when you're navigating any space, and that's, don't assume people know what
Yeah,
you're talking about. So, I don't, I've lost count of how many times I've asked for like definitions, right, or definition alignment. So it's good to kind of set the stage with kind of what we're going to be leaning into and what that actually means. So
and,
I love it.
and to that point, if we ever say anything, and somebody's listening in and they've got a question, if you put it into whatever platform you're listening on, it will pop up for us, and we're
Yep,
happy.
100%.
So, let's dive in. I wrote this down. Ego isn't just a personality issue, it's often a systematic byproduct of how organizations reward behavior.
Yeah, I think that's. I used to regularly say to new employees joining my organization, just by you, right, just by you joining, our culture shifts. Right, you bring with you your past organizations, your past experiences, and so you're going to have a ripple. Right, it's part of the forming, storming, norming, performing cycle. There's always a ripple. So when even when forming a project team, right, there's always a ripple. And what we speak to and what we don't speak to says a lot. And so, to your point, um, what we allow and what we don't allow, right, becomes our norms, the things that we kind of show up to every day. And so, if somebody shows up, and this is, I guess, a survival tactic, right? If somebody shows up in a way that it's all about them, right? It's all about me. It's all about how I want to go about work. I think the definition of egomaniac calls out like they don't care about other people. They just do what they want because it's what they want to do. And if that's spoken to, right, it creates the space for kind of addressing that and calling that out as something that's acceptable or not. And if it's not spoken to, it can sometimes be perceived as acceptable. And I
Right.
think I think the challenge here is like, and you talked about safety, right? Psychological safety. If you have a team or a project team or whatever, and you're in a leadership role, and egotism or Egomaniacalism. Egomaniacalism. Yeah. Say that 5 times fast. I don't even know if that's a word, but there you go. Maybe I can make it a word. If that's allowed and somebody new joins, they're going to see that and they're going to say to themselves, gosh, in order to be safe, right, I have to behave in this way. I have to show up in this way. And next thing you know, right, your culture is predicated on this norm that has either been spoken to or not. And I think that's where we can get, where it gets kind of tricky. And I've seen that play out, right? When you try to do culture change, it's so hard to unwind that. And it's just kind of a slippery slope from there.
Yeah, and something that has actually kept me up at night thinking about is, I mean, I like to consider myself a culture trailblazer, if you will. Like, I'm happy.
That wasn't part of the definition, Steve.
Right. There are times where we're your best attempt and all of the tools in your tool belt. Culture is such a strong influence, and depending on how sponsored and backed up that is from senior leadership and the majority of senior leadership and history and artifacts and all that kind of stuff within an organization, you may not be able to change that culture. And so there is like an element to this that we'll talk about where you can, even as best as possible, create your own bubble of culture within an organization.
Yeah.
But there's so much influence that bubble can have, right?
Yeah.
And,
oh, good. Sorry.
Just sometimes, if, depending on your personal situation, your financial situations, whatever, you can walk away from it because you've done everything that you can. But there are those that get stuck. And so, we're going to talk about how do you create an anti-ego type of culture. We're going to talk about how do you survive in that current culture. But just know that there isn't a quote unquote silver bullet, right, to fixing some of this stuff.
Yeah, there's this I guess survival can be viewed from a variety of angles, right? The organization survival of an egomaniac, the individual survival, the teams. And then like when you started talking about like what you just shared, it made me think about brand.
Yeah.
Right. And even, so if you're creating your own culture bubble, you could be off brand, right? So you could be putting a target on yourself. But additionally, if the brand of the organization, right, is that not so great brand, it can have ripple effects outside of the walls of the organization, right?
Yeah.
It ends up becoming a place where your norm extends beyond the walls of the org. That's something else to survive. So this is a big deal, right? This is a big conversation, and kind of ties back to that power conversation that we were referencing earlier.
Yeah, I think at some point in everybody's career, they're going to come across situations where ego becomes an obstacle, right? And
sure,
some of the behaviors of an egomaniac that folks may have experienced is overconfidence, refusal to delegate, micromanagement, resistance to feedback. That's a big one. And just calling out that, this doesn't necessarily mean that this person's incompetent. Like, they can still be a very competent individual, but the difference between healthy confidence and destructive ego is self-awareness and empathy. Yeah. And I think as we talk about that here, we'll move into how culture can enable ego. It's just important to be aware. And another quick definition is just knowing the difference between sympathy, empathy, and over-identification, right? I think sympathy, you can look at a situation and say, oh, that doesn't look like a great situation. That must suck, right? Mm-hmm. And then like, oh, I've experienced that before. I know exactly how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
How can I put myself in this person's shoes?
Yeah, 100%.
And then there's over-identification, which means I will wear your shoes and, potentially put myself in emotional harm's way experience what you're experiencing, and you don't want to go that far. And then you also, through experience, will develop the ability to empathize.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think that was the question that I kind of was posing in my head as it relates to this persona. I say persona because again, I don't think it's just an individual. I think it can be a team thing. I think it can be an organizational thing, right? That's assumed. Um, and just the idea of like, does the person or individual or team or group, right? Do they deserve empathy?
Yeah.
And how is that even a survival tactic, right? Sticking with kind of the idea that the conversation that we wanted to lean in today, and that's surviving. How is that a survival tactic? Like how can empathy help you survive when you're in the situation where you might feel stuck, right? Maybe you're in a lesser position of power,
Yeah.
and right the person who's showing up or the group that's showing up has greater power than you. There's a great author on LinkedIn. I'll have to look her up and share it in chat here. Who talks about the concept of scapegoating, right? Which can play out in power dynamics. And but I'm just kind of curious, like when you think about empathy, like how is that even a survival tactic? Like what would that even look like? And maybe you have an experience where this played out.
Yeah. There's empathy as strategy as a leadership, and I think we've talked about how there's a difference between leadership and management, right? You can have that positional power, but if you don't have a following, you're not necessarily providing that sort of systematic process, that environment that is conducive to leadership, maybe just management. And I think it's really important to clarify as well that empathy doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it can provide context and can protect your own mental health as we talk
Sure.
about challenges with leadership. And I think one of the most valuable things of using empathy as a strategy is that it can help you recognize trauma, even if you haven't experienced that particular trauma. It can help you recognize insecurity. It can help you recognize sort of like power pressure behind ego. And it can help sort of depersonalize the conflict. And I don't know about you, Brian, but there's been a lot of
I like
times
that. Yeah.
where you kind of like remove the person out of the equation and you kind of recognize like what is actually happening here. And that in and of itself can really sort of change the playing field in which how you're addressing a particular situation. And by addressing, I mean responding to, right? Because I think emotional intelligence allows leaders to stay grounded and avoid sort of that reactive state.
Yeah, it was I think I put this in the post leading up to this conversation, and that's like approaching these situations from an act of empathy is really kind of an act of service, and if you stay in that service space, if it's about serving, right, and serving maybe the person or the organization, it's a it assumes a different intent, right? It's not about, oh my gosh, this person showed up this way and I'm personally, right, and emotionally impacted. Not to say that you shouldn't be or you don't deserve to be, right? I mean, that's a huge deal. And we're absolutely 100%, excuse me, should have got some water. Absolutely 100% not promoting gaslighting yourselves. Just want to be super clear. Like, get your feels, be in your feels, and find the right outlet for that. I think that's the emotional intelligence piece you're speaking to, right, Stephen? Like, find the right like delivery, so that way you can come in back into the situation and say, okay, like let's set the person aside. What are we actually talking about here?
Yeah.
And if you can show up in a depersonalized way, um, I think you might be able to get to resolution. You might be able to survive, right? Survive the egomaniac. And every time I say it, it's just like I'm like, that's such an intense word. Did we choose the right word in labeling this? But
Right.
I'm hoping that we're conveying balance here. But it is an intense word, and I think again, rightfully so. It feels intense when you're dealing with a group or an individual, right, like that.
It and it's funny, right? The term egomaniac, right? It does have a visceral reaction, but I can tell you that I have faces that pop up when
Particular people. Okay.
and
So they're real. So if you're experiencing people like that, they're actually like, if you see faces too, they're real.
if
Okay.
Brian and I try
Fair
really
enough.
respectful because we know that we share a lot of our own network
Yeah, we share. Yeah, exactly.
exercise, because a lot of times these egotistical behaviors are symptomatic of something else. And that could be very personal or it could be professional. And I think as we talk about the difference between approaching things from a very logical standpoint, this emotional intelligence standpoint versus a reactive place, a lot of times it positions you actually into a place of power to be able to ask some really important questions that may get to the root cause of why somebody is acting or pursuing
Mm.
a particular task in a particular way.
Right. So to your point earlier, it may not necessarily be the ego that's showing up, right? It actually might be something else
Yeah.
that was said that triggered them. I remember asking people when I could feel something was up. I would ask them, I'm like, did I do something or say something that broke trust?
Yeah.
And sometimes they would say yeah, and other times they would say no, but I still knew that I did. So it allowed me to still somewhat manage the situation. And it was somebody with ego, right? It was somebody with ego that I asked that question. So it takes courage to survive too. And I think that's got to be, I think, acknowledged and shared as well. It's even in a position of power to exercise that power. It takes courage to move from like, oh, I've got this position. Now I can actually like use it. And what's the best way to do that?
And I think, we were talking about decision making in a previous episode. And I think one of the things about being a leader is how you can shield and protect your team from some of
Mm,
these
yeah.
factors, right? Because we were talking about emotional labor as a definition, right? It takes an immense amount of emotional labor to navigate somebody else's ego, especially if they're at the point in which I consider them an egomaniac, right? And if my team is having to work directly with that individual, that is a huge loss of productivity on my team. And if
Sure.
they're help navigate that emotional labor through my own experience, through my own empathy as a strategy, and protect my team, not only will my retention be better, but
Hmm.
the team is going to be more productive.
So it's almost like you're helping your team survive too, right? It's not just
That's
there's an onus not just to own our own space, but also to own, especially if you have people in your care, um, right? How do you actually equip them as well, right, to armor up? And Rebecca, we see your chat. Uh, we see your chat as well. We can't this streaming app that I use. We can't actually reply back to LinkedIn. So just want to acknowledge that we see that, and that you've definitely worked with folks who had or you've had to depersonalize their actions. Just kudos to you. That's a big deal. And then there's a question from Trista. How do you protect your team when dealing with ego without burning yourself out? Gosh, that's a phenomenal question. I think Steve and I have both been to that point where um, we over identify. Is that what you shared, Stephen? Right? We over identify with what they're going through. But I think you're asking something different. I think you're asking, Trista, that uh, it's an immense amount of energy to just deal with it yourself, but then also having to help your people, right, level up and gain the skills. And I think that can be a little bit tricky. It can depend on the people on your team, right, and what their individual needs. They may come across, and I'm curious what you think too, Stephen. They may come across this person who's showing up that way, and some of the people on your team may not even like, it might even be an issue for them. They just instantly set aside the behavior, and or they just connect, with that person, and so they know how to communicate with them. And there might be a couple who don't. And I think it just really depends on the people on your team, and their personality types. But I think there's an over-identification piece too that Stephen was speaking to, so that you don't get to that burnout space. So, Stephen, curious your thoughts on Trista's question.
Yeah, it's a great question because there have been times where I have personally been able to navigate an egomaniac and do just fine. And there's also been times where I have had to leave a particular opportunity because of sort of a direct threat, if you will, to my own family and well-being from somebody in that very egocentric space. And like we mentioned before, right? There's tons of different scenarios in which you might be encountering this egomaniac at work, and sometimes there just isn't a solution other than knowing when to kind of cut and walk away. But I will say that, at least for me as a leader, and as we continue to talk about this in third place leadership, like what fills my cup, what is my strength, and when I say strength, I mean fills cup, where weaknesses are things that drain me from an energy standpoint, is peace. And so I actually thrive in a space where I'm able to protect my people, and that creates um, a bit of flow for me, a bit of energy for me. Um, and again, the more you can develop empathy through experience, the easier it'll get. Working with an egomaniac is always going to take a toll. And I think as we talk about strategies creating anti-ego ecosystems, and I use ecosystems because it won't necessarily just be in your own professional team, right? There's this concept of third place leadership, this community that we're trying to build here. There's your friends network, there's your family network, and learning how to make sure that you are filling your cup and taking care of yourself, providing your own self-care to where you can show up in ways that you need to show up as a leader. Because I think burnout is a big deal. Every leader I've known has burnt out at some point, and there are ways that they could have prevented it, right? But in the moment, it may feel like that's impossible.
I think personally, I've had to go through burnout to know how to not burn out.
Yeah.
Right? I've gone beyond my limit. And with your particular situation, Trista, would love to just maybe know more. You can reach out and DM us. Maybe we can kind of dig into it a little bit more, so it's in kind of a safe space. But I've kind of had to get to that point. And you kind of have to know your limits. And once you've reached it, to Stephen's point, right, you lean on your community, but then also I just take time. I take time off to let my brain rest and take a break. And sometimes, as uncomfortable as it is, you have to let go of control of some things. And sometimes your team members might need to just kind of potentially work through the situation. But I don't know how. Again, I don't know enough about your situation and how challenging it is to really kind of to dig into giving you a quality answer. So hopefully, what we shared helped. But Stephen, I this ecosystem thing. I don't know if there's more of that ecosystem. Ego. It's an ecosystem.
Hey.
Egomaniacalism, ecosystem. Maybe that's like a thing. Like maybe we need to make that a word, an ecosystem. For sure, Trista, I see your comment. And please reach out if you want to chat more.
Yeah, and the burnout is real is probably something that we should talk about, right? Like, thing I would be happy to spend a half hour with people that it's okay to take some PTO.
Yeah, no kidding. And Amy Leneker, Trista, go look up Amy Leneker. I know Rebecca, because I saw your post, Rebecca, on this. Amy Leneker's got a free class that she's putting out there. It's Unmess Your Stress.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I I have not been able to take it, but I desperately want to because I need to. But Amy Leneker's got a great class out there. Check it out. Go find her. I would imagine there's some great practical tips in there as well. Again, and you can also reach out to us, just direct message Stephen or I. Happy to chat.
We were talking about ecosystems, right?
Yeah. Ecosystems. Yeah.
And how do we build an anti-ego ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
So I want to put it out there that organizational systems can be redesigned to reward humility, collaboration, and shared success, right? We were talking very early on that there's certain cultural behaviors that can be rewarded that actually enable that ego maniacal type behavior that we were talking about. But thinking about things of humility, collaboration, shared success as a means of um, performance can help change. Also, I want
Wait,
to
whose performance though?
huh?
When you say performance, like what do you mean by that? Like whose
I,
performance?
performance in the very general sense of
Oh, like
how
what you measure gets done, kind of a thing. Okay,
like
yeah,
these are important things, right? And
right.
not just,
And it has to be set from the highest level, right? It can't just be,
yeah.
yeah,
And please don't get a part of your mission and vision and then not measure against it, right? Like I have had it with organizations that say we promote psychological safety and then nothing happens, right? If anything, it just creates a larger gap. And I was saying, I was going to bring up the psychological safety is a foundational element. People have to feel safe to speak up without fear, especially
sure.
if you want to get the most out of your team. Uh,
Yeah, I when that word was like, I think it really kind of hit its stride about, I don't know, 4 years ago, something like that. Psychological safety, and I really I didn't mean to interrupt you, Steven, so I'll make it quick here. But I really wanted to understand what that actually meant. Like, actually, how do you do that, right? There's a lot of books out there, and there's a lot of ways that are professed on how to create psychological safety. But as a leader, as a manager, I'm like, how do I do that? But like, make it simple enough that I can sustain it, right? Versus making a checklist of 10 things I want to do, but then I go a mile long and an inch deep. And the only thing I kept coming back to is be consistent,
yeah,
right? So if you're going to promise something, I think this goes down to measurement, right? If you're going to measure something and you're going to drive people towards something, you have to show up every single day, every moment, every conversation consistently. Otherwise, you talked about this earlier, the history, the trauma, the background, I think can take hold and overtake any progress you've made in the psychological safety space. And so consistency is vital there.
and I have two like personal examples because I know we haven't shared too many of those on this
Yeah.
episode, but speaking of like humility, collaboration, and shared success, so promoting this, right, the psychological safety, as we mentioned, right, it can't just be talk, it has to be walk. And I remember I when I first started a particular organization, I spent the first couple of weeks just having one-on-ones with all 70 of my staff members. And I remember it was very obvious to me on how leadership had interacted with these staff members when I had individuals coming into my office for this introductory one-on-one, nervous and in tears because they thought they were in trouble. And they were like, I've
Mm,
never such and such director in my 20 years of being here. Is everything
mm,
okay? I'm about to lose my job. And it's like, no, this is just for me to get to know you and learn about what it is that you do, and you can learn about me. And I want to start creating this safe space for communication, right? And over time, I remember I eventually had a staff member come into my office and say, I have some feedback on
mm.
something I'm doing. And I remember when they gave me that feedback, and this is when I was in leadership early on, my first, despite knowing what I hate psychology, my first reaction was defensiveness, right? Even when they started, like I've got some feedback for you, I immediately just feel this defensiveness. And one of the best things I did was just kind of take a breath in that moment and really listen to what it is that they had to hear. And despite still feeling defensive inside, I remember thanking them for their feedback because their feedback was valid and it was actually great feedback. And being able to not penalize somebody because I was feeling defensive or I was trying to save my own image, right? Protect my own ego currently is existing. I'm having that visceral reaction, right? And
Mm,
being reward them by thanking them and
mm.
actually changing my behavior because of feedback that they promoted, I guarantee you that individual now feels comfortable coming back and providing feedback. And then
Yeah.
they're also going to explain that to their peers, right? Because you're in a
Sure.
position, you can say it till you're blue in the face, but until peers are sort of sharing this feeling of confidence in your ability to provide psychological safety, it's not going to happen. There's going to have to be those early adopters who take that risk, and you've shown that you can follow through. And
So I'm going to take a stab at something here.
yeah, go ahead.
So to move from an ecosystem to an ecosystem, right, of safety, trying this out here, ecosystem to an ecosystem of safety. As a leader, you can equip yourself and your team for survival through what you model.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely.
And the behaviors that drive from what you model.
Yeah.
So even if you can equip your team to do some of that defense as a leader that you maybe have been trying to take on your own as well. So there's a residual impact, a residual benefit as well, as if you equip those around you through what you model and you create that safety, they may be able to take some of that as well and survive on their own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the second example that I want to share is, because I think this speaks numbers about leadership, is this celebrating shared success. And no, I'm not talking about pizza party in the lobby that somebody are coming into the office,
I
right?
love pizza parties, Stephen,
I
and I love pie parties too.
look at this body. It was built on pizza, man. I love my pizza. But I want to redefine what we're talking about when we're saying we're celebrating success here, right? Because when we talked about common drivers of ego and leadership, desire for recognition, fear of failure, need for control, insecurity, and self-image.
Mm.
And I remember I had to give a presentation directly to the governor of Washington.
Just really quick,
Yeah.
y'all, if you want to like see an amazing speaker, like go watch Steven. He's
Oh,
gonna downplay it, but weren't you like Toastmasters president or something like that at some point?
I mean, yes, but yeah,
So
or
there's a
whatever.
reason why I have Steven on here with me.
But I
All
will
right,
say,
sorry. Finish your story. I just
yeah,
wanted to give you. I just wanted to give you props, man. You're a great speaker.
thank you. I appreciate that,
Yeah.
Brian. Thank you for the feedback. It's uncomfortable. But I had to give a presentation directly to the governor, and this presentation was sent to me. And the only thing that I really needed to change on it was the last slide just had my contact info on it. And I remember thinking to myself, like, because trust me, I've got my own insecurities, thinking I wasn't the one who put all the hard work into this presentation. It was my team. I'm just the one that's here to regurgitate that information in a way that can help my stakeholder, in this case, the governor, understand what it is that we're trying to convey. Right. And so I remember I adjusted that slide to put, here's credit to the team members. Put the slide together. And if you have any questions, either reach out to them or reach out to me. And I remember after I gave that presentation, the main person who put that together came to me in tears because they were so honored that their name was presented in front of the governor for a presentation they've done or put together numerous times. And he was like, and my mom's even watching,
That's pretty cool.
And
that's awesome.
To realize, like, good leaders are never going to provide results just on their own. I think is really important for people to digest and understand. If you are wholeheartedly taking credit for your team's efforts, like that in and of itself is something you need to be self-aware of, and you really need to think about that. Because honestly, I think a success as a leader is how do you get the most out of your team? And if you are able to show up and display and show, like, hey, my team is producing this great content to where I just have to come here and communicate it to you to further drive our strategy towards the vision that somebody has laid out for the next couple of years, that is so important. That is so important. And so the next time, if you're in a leadership position and somebody provides you a piece of work that's very visible, See how you feel about putting their name on it. And is that something that you can comfortably do, feel confident about? Because if
I'm
not, there's work to do there, you know?
I love that. I'm going to double up on that challenge. And this is kind of tied to succession planning and helping your team members level up. And that's invite them in to present with you. I'll give them the platform. Sometimes it might be scary, right? Because the audience is very powerful, right? There's
Yeah.
a lot of weight in the room. So you kind of have to prepare them for that, but invite them in as well. I mean, I think those little intentional acts, Stephen, can create an environment that's survivable when you have ego show up, right? An ego system created or presented itself. Like, and it doesn't have to be big leaps. I think what you described are steps, right? They're steps towards kind of that climate, or creating that climate of survival, or that ecosystem of survival that you so amazingly coined earlier. So love that. We have about 5 minutes left. Would love see the comments in chat. Yes, Amy is awesome. Yes, Crystal, how leaders respond in those moments is absolutely critical, and uh, and no leader is perfect in that space either, including myself. I mean, we're people too, right? We have families and lives and stressors, and I remember sharing with my folks, they come to me and they say, "Hey, sorry for showing up the way I did the other day." And my response was, I try not to box you in. I expect you to show up a little bit different from day to day, just because life happens. But yes, 100%, how we respond is critical. Even kind of owning that, right? Hey, I didn't going back and owning it. That humility piece that you spoke to, Stephen. And
Yeah.
yes, celebrating success is huge. Thank you, Trista.
I think, we talk about personal power versus positional power. And I think it's just home dynamics and
Mm,
like the courage it takes to apologize to your kids when you're wrong as a parent, you
mm,
know,
yeah,
like that in and of itself is its own form of, measuring your own ego. Uh,
absolutely.
does that follow you into work? Because ego isn't going anywhere, right? Like it's always going to be, our ability to respond to it can evolve. And I think that's, what we really want to convey here. And, strong leadership isn't about winning. Now, depending on your organization, as a leader, you do need to provide results, right? But it's about lifting others. If you lift others, you're going to produce those results, especially if they're designated in very strategic spots to be able to deliver on those results. So, what we're trying to do here is just really change this thought process of, just because a particular position doesn't necessarily make you better than anybody else. In fact, I think the higher up you are in leadership, the more you need to recognize the fact that you are just a human being as well. You need to understand what your authority requires you to do, because those who are quote unquote beneath you in an organization are relying on you to provide these essential authoritative strategies and decision making. But the more humility you can bring, the more shared success you can bring, the more transformative of a culture you can provide to drive better results, more productivity you'll have, for sure.
Yeah, and really kind of tying back to really what we're talking about today as well, and that's survival, and safety, right? It's what are the things that we can do and that we have control over that can equip that survival, right, and that safety for us and our teams. And so I love that. We have again a few more minutes. If there are any other questions, please pop them in chat. Again, it's LinkedIn does not, I do not have the ability to reply back. If you were on YouTube, we can comment with you there. So if you haven't gone to YouTube, there's some other videos out there that you can check out. And then Facebook, I have to wait 60 days before we can go live on Facebook. So we're not real for like 60 days, but but I believe that allows for messaging back and forth. And TikTok, like you have to have so many followers. I'm learning about all this stuff, but yes, life outside the laptop, 100%, Rebecca. It's the worst. Uh, Rebecca, you always keep it real. I can always expect that. I love that.
It, just from this sounds so formal, Brian, but I think it's really important to throw out there as we start to talk about some of this really hard. But there's a point in time where you're not just managing egomaniacs. You can become tolerant of abusive behavior that's not okay.
Sure.
And so make sure that you're also recognizing that and work with your HR folks if you need to, because things like discrimination and bullying and whatnot should not be tolerated. And if you tolerate it as a leader, your team members will see that. And so it's important to also know where's that line, right? What's okay, okay, as we start talking about some of this tougher stuff.
We want to create a healthy ecosystem, not an ego system.
Correct.
Thank
And your
you.
use for abuse goes up the more you experience it. So
100%. Well, thank you all for joining us and the questions and the comments. Have a wonderful day. Hope to see you next time. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Stephen.
yep. Thanks, Brad.